and welcome to Beyond the News. I'm your host Unzela. And in today's episode, we'll be discussing the anti-encroachment drive in Karachi. Then we'll look at world leaders marking the 100th anniversary of the armistice. Following that, heavy rain in Dubai washed Pakistan's chances of a series victory. And finally, we'll be looking at World Pneumonia Day being held today to spread the awareness. But first, our lead story tonight. The ongoing anti-encroachment operation in Sadr area entered its crucial phase yesterday as authorities demolished more than 1,000 shops in 4 markets surrounding the iconic Empress Market. Now, the joint operation was conducted by the Karachi Metropolitan Corporation and other civic bodies and was backed by law enforcement agencies on the directives of the Supreme Court of Pakistan. The authorities stated that they had engaged the protesting shopkeepers in talks that led to the end of their sit-ins. However, shopkeepers accused the authorities of violating an agreement reached with them during their meeting with the Karachi Commissioner, under which they were supposed to give time to remove their goods and other valuables from their shops by noon yesterday. Later, however, KMC authorities, backed by heavy contingents of police and rangers, brought heavy machinery to the Empress Market in the early hours of the morning around 7 a.m. and the operation was launched. The authorities now claim that they would turn the area around Empress Market to its original shape within the next 15 days. However, many shopkeepers took to the streets and staged sit-ins in the market's vicinities to protest against the ongoing drive. They were supported by many leaders of political parties who reached out to the protesters and pledged their support, assuring that they would communicate their grievances to the government and attempt to resolve this issue amicably. Meanwhile, another anti-encroachment drive was conducted on Khalid bin Walid Road, and the operation was carried out by the district's anti-encroachment staff and officials who demolished several illegally built parking ramps and dozens of other illegal structures such as signboards and stalls. Therefore, it seems that the ongoing drive initiated by the KMC on the orders of the Apex Court is in full swing, and the urgency reflects the authorities' desire to remove illegal structures from the city for good. So to talk more on this issue, we have with us our distinguished guest, Commissioner of Karachi, Mr. Iftikhar Shalwani. Mr. Shalwani, great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, it's alleged that the KMC only gave a week's notice to the encroachers in the ongoing encroachment drive in the city, and due to this, many people couldn't move away their important valuables. So what do you have to say about this?
What we did, the KMC had given them notices that tenancy was cancelled, and it was cancelled with an appropriate notice. And we had given them ample time to remove their stuff, and it was removed. And you can imagine that the whole operation was carried out without a single person being injured or not any untoward incident that happened. So I think we did it with quite carefulness, and we did it with quite responsibility. And as you said rightly, we wanted to bring Karachi to its past glory, and we are on our way to do that.
Now, it's been seen that many drives have been conducted by the KMC in the past, but there hasn't been any success. So what makes this specific ongoing drive different from the ones that have been conducted in the past?
Of course, I mean, we had the orders of the Supreme Court, which we had to comply, and then we had all the administrative machinery, and we planned it to do it in a way that anyone who comes or who protests, of course, I mean, but I think we are trying to compensate all the people who have been affected, who have been snatched away their livelihood out of this operation, but they know they were illegal. They had done encroachments. They were given only a 4x4 cabin size, like a cabin about 40 to 45 years ago, but they had made big markets out of that cabin. And now they knew they were not right, but still the people who were doing their business, for the last 40 years, we'll try to compensate them, and there is a committee which will work on it.
Mr. Shalwani, many people allege that KMC only targets the small vendors or the street hawkers who occupy illegal space, and they don't target the big entities that occupy the illegal land. So how true is this, and what's your opinion?
I mean, the current anti-encroachment drive that we have started, I don't think that is the right news. I mean, we have taken action against the big fish, and we have taken action with the big encroachers who have extended their shops, extended their plazas, and they were not only fruit vendors; they were occupying big urban space, illegally built supermarket shops, and I think we have taken action against the people who had a lot of like street power, but still I think we have been successful in that.
And we're seeing many protests by shopkeepers, particularly in the southern area, against the ongoing drive by the government. So, Mr. Shalani, will the government compensate these grieving protesters?
Yeah, definitely we will. I mean, there have been protests by the poor people who have been deprived of their livelihood, and I think we're going to compensate them. There will be a committee who will be supervising all the compensation claims, and we'll definitely give them some alternate space where they can continue with their business and earn their livelihood with respect and dignity.
So what course of action do you think that the government will take next after the drive, and who's going to clean up the rubble of so many buildings destroyed in the ongoing drive?
But let me tell you at the outset that please, I mean, I really don't want this administration or anyone who have done this operation to celebrate. It's not a victory. The real victory will be when we'll compensate these people who have been affected, and we'll restore this Empress Market to its original shape as it was 60, 70 years ago. That will be the real victory, and inshallah we'll do it.
Great, thank you very much, Commissioner Karachi, Mr. Iftikhar Shalwani, on the anti-encroachment drive in Karachi and its effects on the small vendors. And now we'll move on to a quick break with more top stories. Welcome back. Thank you for tuning in. Now let's take a look at one of the most important days in European history, the 100th anniversary of the ending of World War I. French President Emmanuel Macron led tributes yesterday to the millions of soldiers killed during World War I in an emotional ceremony in Paris, which was attended by key world leaders. US President Donald Trump, Russian President Vladimir Putin, German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and dozens of monarchs, princes, presidents, and prime ministers of various countries joined Macron to mark the moment the guns fell silent across Europe 100 years earlier. The ceremony took place in Paris as a tribute and honor to those who died during the 1914-18 war and to commemorate the signing of the armistice that brought the fighting to an end at exactly 11 a.m. on November 11th back in 1918. However, at the event, French President Macron spoke bluntly of the threat from nationalism, calling it a betrayal of moral values, as he took a direct jibe at US President Donald Trump, who has described himself as a nationalist and has promoted what he calls an American first policy. Furthermore, in a 20-minute address delivered at the tomb of the unknown soldier, President Macron described the unimaginable hell of those who fought in the trenches, denouncing the nationalism and fanned the flames of war, which now shows signs of resurgence in the world. He stated that patriotism was the exact opposite of nationalism and that nationalism is a betrayal to patriotism. According to Mr. Macron, this was because when countries put their interests first, they erase the very thing that a nation holds most precious, and that is, in his opinion, moral values. Now, this was a very strong speech in this contemporary era, which was attended by several world leaders to mark an important lesson in world history. This is because the key lesson of the First Great War was primarily due to the resentment of people and shouldn't be forgotten, an event which saw millions of people killed along with 10 million soldiers. Hence, yesterday's memorial brought the world's attention back to one of the most gruesome atrocities ever to have been committed in human history, and every country in the world is hence naturally obliged not to repeat such a catastrophe ever again. To talk more on the World War I armistice commemoration and contemporary global politics, we have with us our guest, senior editor and journalist, Mr. Maqbool Malik. So, Mr. Malik, thank you very much for joining Beyond the News.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure for me too.
Now, for the first question, what did you think of the World War I armistice ceremony taking place yesterday in Paris?
You have very rightly summarized almost all major events that took place in France yesterday. The event was huge. The world had to get a message that what happened exactly 100 years ago. And the way yesterday's ceremony took place, I mean, there were, in my opinion, a couple of bad taste moments. And partly for that, the U.S. President Trump is at least to be brought into limelight, if not criticized directly. And the moment as the host country's president, I think, was carried by President Emmanuel Macron. And he had very rightly, very intelligently pointed out that today, most of the world leaders, they are misunderstanding, they are misinterpreting patriotism. What is patriotism? It is not that you end up being a nationalist, which actually means that you hide yourself into a false shell. Patriotism is being open, being multinational beyond your national borders, beyond your regional borders. If you are in Europe, then you cannot really be patriotic if you are thinking only within the terms of the French national boundaries. You have to go beyond that, and the same applies to countries in Asia and in Africa and in Latin America. And there, I think the message that went out to the whole world from President Macron, that was something which must be underlined boldly, broadly, and that was, don't conceal patriotism, which is positive, into nationalism, because nationalism, like you have said, is exactly the opposite of patriotism, and it actually kills any nation's given standard moral values. So this is how I see yesterday's events.
Right. And Mr. Macron seems to be at complete odds with Donald Trump. So how do you see the future of the cooperation between Europe and America?
That is very true, sadly. Not only President Macron is at odds with the U.S. president, we have seen that German Chancellor Angela Merkel, she has had huge differences with President Trump in the past, and these differences are not over yet, and if at all there could be a story from the past in the next few days or weeks, no, not at all. I do not see it like that. Thing is, I mean, this difference of opinion on two sides across the Atlantic is going to continue, because whatever the whole world says, what Mr. Trump says, thinks, and does is mostly opposite to what most of the countries, for example, even within the NATO alliance, say or do. He has been riding a horse that he called America First, like you have said yourself too. So if you make such slogans and you come into power and you are being clearly a populist who is trying to use, I would not say misuse, who's trying to use, take advantage of the public feeling that I am the one who's thinking about you, I am the one to safeguard your national interests. But then at the end of the day, what the whole world has seen, and you have seen, and we have seen, that U.S. ended up moving out of more than one international treaties. So that's not how you lead, in my opinion, speaking politically, how you lead a world power in today's world, in 2018. So what we see is that, for example, if you just try to take a deeper look at the problem, not only politically, but also economically. Today we are living in a globalized world. We have economic globalization, and we have regional agreements, blocks, which are trying to solve problems facing different people in different countries. And many nations, they are trying to find a solution to the problem, not at national, but at the regional level. On the other hand, what do we see? We see, for example, Facebook. It is just one company from America. It is almost accessible to everybody in all the countries. You talk about Twitter. You talk about German car industry. They make their cars and they sell it all over in the world, and so is the French car industry. You know, you talk about Renault or you talk about Peugeot. Thing is, when the economy is working globally, how can you contain yourself politically only to your own national borders? This is being mean. This is closing your eyes right in front of the reality. And this is, I'm sorry to say, what President Trump is doing. And even worse to me personally was his recent statement when he said, I'm not really very much fond of so many big international treaties. So are we in a world now today where we might see in coming months only under President Trump that Washington decides to move out of the UN? He has already stopped paying funds to UNICEF. He has already come out of the UN Paris Environment Treaty. And about sanctions against Iran, I mean, everybody knows that Washington has taken all the steps almost single-handedly. And exactly on this issue, Washington has had huge differences with its European partners, even with its NATO partners. So this is not the best possible way politically, or to be politically correct, that you try to move as President of the United States in today's world politics. So this difference of agreement for sure is going to continue, like your question was earlier. Macron is a young French president, and he knows clearly what he has to say. He carries a whole tradition of the French politics in his statements, in his politics. But also the politics which German Chancellor Merkel is following. On the other hand, we do see a lot of negative trends, I would call them, in some countries, even within European Union, where you have a lot of nationalism popping up, But these are those, so to say, the aftershocks of the original tremors which came from Washington. For example, today we have nationalist governments, even within members of the European Union, and so to say, for example, in Hungary and in Poland and in Czech Republic also, there are politicians ruling the government who are not really centrists. They are very much inclined going towards, from moderate to extremist right-wing politics. And this is not, the way, the shape, the political package that Europe should be showing to the whole world outside Europe, and especially not at all when it comes from America.
And Mr. Malik, in your opinion, what is the importance of this commemoration ceremony? What lessons should the world learn from the First World War?
Oh, the lessons that the world should have learned, but not really learned at all, to be honest. We had one world war coming to an end in 1918, and it was just a tiny bit over only like 2 decades. In late 30s, we saw the beginning of a new world war. And then that war too continued for years and years, and that also killed millions of people from so many different countries. Then the world had this tragic event where millions of Jews were also killed by the Nazis. That was Holocaust. But what have we learned after that? The thing is, when the Iron Curtain fell and Soviet Union broke and there were major changes coming into Europe, what have we seen in the Balkan region? I don't think that any student of political science has already forgotten what happened in Bosnia. They were European people with political history and tradition, and still we saw in Balkan the Bosnian Muslims fighting against the Bosnian Croats, and the Croats and the Muslims fighting against the Serbs, and Serbs killing the Muslims and Serbs killing the Croats, who were both Christians, So the lessons, sadly, I'm not a pessimist, but were not really learned. That should have been there. This is one thing. And secondly, in today's world also, we see a lot of political disagreement between different world leaders. And I can quote you a good recent example to that. It was just late last week that French president, he has been talking and meeting European leaders and talking about a new European force. And this idea was not liked by the leadership in White House, only because America has such a huge army, they have a huge defense industry, and they make their foreign politics based on where the U.S. Army goes.
President Macron made the occasion relevant by bringing the notice of contemporary issues, particularly the rise of nationalism. So what do you have to say about that?
Nationalism is no good, for sure. And this is not only President Macron saying that. This is also Theresa May saying that in Britain. This is also Angela Merkel saying that in Germany. And this is also the Spanish and the Portuguese prime ministers down to Italy and also in Greece. Nationalism, as far as it blindfolds you, it takes you away from reality and makes you take a refuge within your own predefined prejudices, is not at all a good solution for any region, country, or state in any way, in any part of the world. So Macron was very right when he spoke not only on behalf of République Française, He also spoke on behalf of the European Union, and he's so very much right. But the sad thing is that this idea from him was not taken well by President Trump. And what he said was that nationalism, President Donald Trump is the person who declares himself openly as a nationalist. Now the question is, should we expect some political expert to explain the ruler in the White House that how exactly you differentiate between patriotism and nationalism? We have recently seen, there were thousands of Latin American refugees moving across a whole stretch of land in Mexico and trying to move towards the Mexican border with the U.S. And President Trump, he just immediately signed a new legislation and had thousands of U.S. soldiers deployed on the Mexican-American border. Is that the way that you encastle yourself? You create big barbed wires around you. You build up high walls. Is that how you're going to make yourself feel safe in today's world? Not at all. Today's world could be safer when it is open, when there is less threat of weapons being used, when there is less heated debate about nationalism, which actually blindfolds people. You have to be open politically. You have to be more humane in your politics. You have to see. Is it time? I ask sometimes myself, why isn't so that the European and the North American leaders, they are not really very much talking about, the hunger problem in Africa. They're not talking about corruption in Asia. Why not? But what we see is that, when President Trump went to visit Saudi Arabia, the whole world had seen, he was holding a sword in his hand and dancing with the Saudi rulers. Okay, fine. But why? This whole definition of inter-country relationships, it is based on economic interests and strategic military interests. So when you are led by such interests, then it is only after that you could be good for your society, you could be good for your country in a shorter run, only financially, in terms of trade, export, arms industry, but you could possibly not have a place for yourself in history as a president who really has done a great deal for his own country or for the world at large.
Some very interesting points. Mr. Maqbool Malik, senior journalist, giving us his take on the World War I armistice ceremony. And now we'll move on to another break with more straight after. Hello and welcome back to Beyond the News. Now let's take a look at some lighter news in the world of sports. The Indian women's cricket team captain Mithali Raj scored an important half-century that powered her team to a comfortable 7-wicket win over arch rivals Pakistan yesterday. The Indian team was chasing a modest target of 133, and Raj's 56-run knock, which included 7 boundaries, helped India to chase down the target comfortably. However, the chase was made easier by the fact that Pakistan committed many silly mistakes during the match, which included Pakistan's batters gifting India 10 penalty runs because they were consistently running on the pitch. Moreover, this result leaves India top of its group table as they also defeated New Zealand in their opening match, while Pakistan suffered their second straight loss of the tournament. Meanwhile, persistent rain forced the third and final one-day international between Pakistan and New Zealand's men's cricket team to be abandoned yesterday, which extended Pakistan's 7-year wait for a series win over New Zealand. Furthermore, New Zealand were set a daunting 280-run target by Pakistan, who batted first and were in full command as their bowling attack carried over the positive momentum to get an early New Zealand wicket. However, only after bowling 6.5 overs, rain halted the play. This unfortunately resulted in the series being tied at 1-1, as New Zealand earlier won the first match by 47 runs, while Pakistan claimed the second by 6 wickets, with both games played in Abu Dhabi. Moreover, Pakistan has now not defeated New Zealand in a one-day series since their win in New Zealand back in 2011. Having lost 4 series previously, which included 1 in UAE and 3 in New Zealand. Now, to talk more on the developments in Pakistan cricket, we have our guest and renowned sports analyst, Mr. Umar Ghaznavi. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Ghaznavi.
Pleasure being here, Unzela.
So, firstly, how do you assess the performance of Pakistan's women cricket team against the arch rivals India?
I know they're arch rivals, but I think there's a big gulf between the Pakistan women's team and the Indian women's team because India is ranked in the top 3 teams consistently. They're probably one of the major contenders for the title. And Pakistan are still struggling to really take off from the ground level. I think we're still waiting for our major breakthrough in women's cricket.
So what are the chances of Pakistan's women's cricket team progressing further, having already lost the 2 crucial matches in the tournament?
It's obviously difficult. Pakistan, again, I think the positive for them would be to at least take 1 win in the group stages and just build from there. The thing is that, look, the expectations are not very high, but Pakistan cricket progressed for a few years. And then the women's cricket kind of stagnated. Other teams which, like the West Indies, actually ended up winning the T20 World Cup last time. And Pakistan team hasn't made those kind of improvements, especially in its batting. Again, we seem to have a very good bowling lineup, but our batting seems to lack that edge which you need to become one of the top teams.
Thank you for that insight, Mr. Ghaznavi, and that was the renowned sports analyst discussing the recent cricket matches. And that's all we have for tonight. Join us again tomorrow as we take you beyond the news.